Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider.
Good morning, buddy boy.
How you doing this morning, my friend?
Swell.
Swell is good. You haven't hit the midseason wall after just 1 week, right?
No, not yet.
Okay. I just wanted to check. We have a fantastic show in store for all of our listeners today. 5 big game breakdowns highlighted by a couple of unique matchups in prime time. Also going to bring on a guest. It'll be his maiden voyage as part of the Bet the Board podcast, John Sheeran, the director of FanDuel Sportsbook. Imagine he's going to have all sorts of interesting tidbits to share with you, our listeners. It's a part of the podcast that we've desperately missed over the last season or so. But Payne, before we get into breaking down some of these games and you taking jabs at my Golden Knights, who are now out on the golf course after bowing out against the Dallas Stars in 5 games, we had a contest winner that got off to a great start, and I wasn't sure if you wanted to share that information and give him his proper due.
Yeah, Benny was our week 1 winner of the Bet the Board 5K contest at _Las Vegan. So he went a perfect 5-0, and that slew of missed field goals in the Titans game certainly helped him win the tiebreaker. So Benny is our week 1 winner. And it's going to take a 5-0 performance every single week to win the weekly prizes. A lot of guys started 5-0 this week, but it came down to that tiebreaker, and Benny ultimately won it.
Yeah, no participation trophies with a field this competitive, so congratulations to Benny. As we mentioned throughout the course of the season, for all of those folks out there, even if you find yourself eliminated, which no one should be after week 1, there's plenty of weekly prizes available if you happen to go 5-0. Get right where you need to be on the tiebreaker. It'll pay dividends, and you can wear your Bet the Board swag prominently throughout the course of football season. Payne, before we get into the games that we were going to preview today, just wanted to get your quick thoughts and takeaways from what we saw on Monday night, whether it was Big Ben and how he looked in his first game in well over a year, or that debacle that was disguised as a football game between the Tennessee Titans and the Denver Broncos.
Everything we kind of expected, honestly. The matchup that we saw in the first game was Juju Smith-Schuster against a Giants secondary that was missing some guys that struggled to defend the slot, and that's where Juju operates out of. We handpicked that matchup and said that was the one to focus on, and Juju absolutely dominated. The one thing we also discussed was the addition of Matt Canada to the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. He had an influence. We saw more pre-snap motion from the Steelers. We saw a little bit more play action. I thought Big Ben struggled a little bit early, which was to be expected, but I thought the offense did pretty well. Obviously, the loss of James Conner is going to be a big one. We'll have to monitor the David DeCastro injury issue there, and then obviously it looked like late in that game, another big injury to the Steelers' offensive line. The late game was a little bit sloppy, kind of what we expected. Elevation took its toll on some of those guys that weren't in the best shape, so it really became some sloppy football. But we expected Denver to be a little bit down this year. If you listen to the AFC West preview podcast, and the Titans did enough. They deserved that game, should have won it. And sadly for books, they ended up getting middled in that game.
Yeah, nothing like a game falling right there on the dreaded 2 for a team that opened as a 2.5-point favorite, closed as a 3.5. Opened as a 2.5-point underdog, closed as a 3.5-point favorite. The good 6-point move, and it happens to fall 16-14. But a couple teams that we'll keep tabs on. All right, on to this weekend's games, Payne. And a pair of 0-1 teams set to do battle in Big D as it's the Cowboys welcoming in the Atlanta Falcons. Number on this game is Dallas, a 4.5-point favorite, total 53 at FanDuel right now. And when you look at this Cowboys team, I don't know what better way to describe it than tight games malaise. I mean, this is a team that's now 1-7 in one possession games since the start of last season. And when you look at the Cowboys, they haven't exactly helped line people's wallets either. 5-8 straight up, 2-10-1 against the number of the last 13 non-divisional games as a favorite. But the one thing we've seen from Dak Prescott, he performs significantly better at home than he does on the road. And lucky for Dak, he has a Falcons defense coming in that, at least to me, appears ripe for the picking.
I think so. Yeah, without question. And it's only, one game. So we're mentally trained not to overreact about what we saw week 1. But they have to show out here. I was a little bit excited coming into the season about the pairing of Kellen Moore and Mike McCarthy, and it didn't really unfold. Kellen Moore was supposed to be this, huge analytics guy, and he had the familiarity with the players and the systems, and that's why Mike McCarthy retained him. And then Mike McCarthy takes this year off, and he's like, I've embraced analytics. And if you've read some articles, he actually hung out at the PFF offices for about a week, trying to absorb as much as he possibly could. And then Kellen Moore and Mike McCarthy face a Rams defense that are breaking in a new coordinator. They lost the second most defensive snaps year over year, and there's zero creativity of that offense. So that's what makes me a little nervous, is hopefully they go back to the drawing board here in this week off and devise things to put their players in the best position to succeed. And we've talked about some of these things over time. Pre-snap motion helps. Play action passing helps. Dallas ran 4% motion at the snap. That was 26 most in week 1. Dak threw off play action just 24% of the time. That was below average week 1. Dallas didn't pass enough, 58% the first 3 quarters. But if you look during that stretch, Dak completed nearly 70% of his passes for 8.5 yards an attempt and a 61% success rate, 108 passer rating. Like, keep throwing the ball. I didn't understand what I saw. When you look at Dak, when he had the ability to throw on first down the first 3 quarters, which is when we talk about throwing the ball, right? Keep defenses on their heels. Throw on first down. It's the down where run or pass has to be defended. Dak averaged 10.8 yards per attempt and a 92% success rate when throwing on first down the first 3 quarters. It just wasn't implemented enough. When you start to look at this week and you were creating or devising this game plan to prepare for Dan Quinn's defense, if this isn't a pass-heavy game plan for Dak and the Cowboys offense, I'm going to lose faith. There's no conceivable way that you could do your off-season analysis and then your week 1 film study of Atlanta's defense and think this is going to be a Zeke game. This has to be a pass-first offense this week. It has to be a creative game plan, more motion, more play-action passing. All the issues that we thought the Falcons defense had coming into the season were completely exposed week 1. Their secondary was a problem. Poor A.J. Terrell. Did you welcome to the league, buddy? That was his introduction. It ain't going to
get any easier for AJ this week either, that's for sure.
No, we have to hope he's got a short-term memory, because Terrell was targeted 6 times. He gave up a catch all 6 times along with a touchdown. Russell Wilson had a perfect passer rating when picking on the rookie. And it wasn't just A.J. Terrell. The entire Falcons secondary did not force Russell Wilson to make a single tight window throw all game. So anytime a Seattle receiver caught the ball, there wasn't a defender within at least a yard of him. So I think if you pass the ball here, Kellen Moore, Mike McCarthy, Dak are going to have some success through the air. The Falcons defense was so bad, right, that in the first 3 quarters, the Seahawks only faced third down 6 times. Atlanta kept giving up a first down on either first or second down. When Seattle did have a third down to pick up the first 3 quarters, their average yards to go was only 4.8 yards. So this has got to be a pass-first offense, pass to then set up the run. I do think the loss of Blake Jarwin stings this Cowboys offense, Todd. He was supposed to kind of be that seam buster. When you have Amari, Gallup, and Lamb, Jarwin was that uber-talented threat that was likely forgotten week to week a little bit, and he could make a play. Dalton Schultz isn't that guy, so Blake Jarwin is a big loss to this offense.
Well, and you mentioned the fact that this shouldn't be a Zeke game. I'll contend that it could be a Zeke game if they throw the ball to him out of the backfield, which they had success doing in the first half against the Rams before abandoning it. We saw last week, you mentioned all those prolific offensive stats from the Seahawks. Chris Carson had 6 catches for 45 yards and 2 touchdowns. Let's not kid ourselves. He's not the second coming of Marshall Faulk, but we know if there's a running back involved and you have even the slightest ability to catch passes, you lick your chops when you see the Falcons show up on the schedule. So we'll get a better idea of exactly what this Dallas offense is against one of the league's lightweights in terms of overall defense. Now, on the other side of the ball, Payne, it's obviously the Falcons' strength offensively against the Cowboys' weakness defensively. This is a Dallas defense who's extremely banged up, specifically in the linebacking core, as they lose Leighton Vander Esch to a broken collarbone. Sean Lee won't return until the middle of October. Jared Goff, pretty pedestrian, at least for me, for the Rams, but Robert Woods still was able to go for 100-plus yards and enter a trio of Falcons receivers fresh off 9 catches, 100-plus receiving yard days in Russell Gage, Calvin Ridley, and, of course, the leader of the pack, Julio Jones.
Dirk Cutter's really trying to give Dan Quinn his run for the money on which side of the ball is worse coached. I don't really see anything going on with Atlanta from their coaching staff that breeds confidence. The theme of Atlanta's offense continues, and it's that Matt Ryan and Julio can move the offense up and down the field. But since the departure of Kyle Shanahan, they don't convert enough of these great opportunities. It happened again in week 1. This is something we talked about when Dirk Cutter was hired, about how poor some of his red zone offenses were in Tampa. It's kind of carried over here. Now, I know the red zone specific offenses look good because they got 2 garbage touchdowns late. But if you actually look at some of these drives that entered deep into Seattle territory, they struggled. The first 2 drives Atlanta had, it was a 2nd and 5 at the Seattle 32. It ends in a field goal. Second drive, a 3rd and 1 at the Seattle 38. Atlanta comes away with 0 points. Late in the third quarter, when you can at least apply some pressure back on Seattle and close it to a 1-possession game heading to the 4th, Atlanta has a 3rd and 2 on the Seattle 11, come away with 0 points again. It's not until the 4th quarter, when Atlanta's down 19 and 20, does the offense get going, and it's because Seattle went a little softer defensively. They played to keep everything in front. Even with that, in the 4th quarter, Atlanta has a 2nd and 3 at the Seattle 35. That drive also ends in 0 points. And, the Falcons' offense wasn't all that great in non-junk time either. 5.9 yards per play, a 40% success rate the first 3 quarters. Dirk Cutter just does nothing to help his guys. Matt Ryan threw with play action 12% of the time, 4th least amount in week 1. Cutter used motion at the snap 1% of the time. So he's doing nothing to help this offense. That was the 2nd least amount in week 1. So it's sad to see, and we've kind of mentioned this throughout the time, Todd, the last few years, but we're burning the primes of Matt Ryan and Julio Jones with this junk coaching staff. When you're looking at this week, fortunately, Atlanta gets a Cowboys defense that's hurting a bit. They're learning a new scheme under Mike Nolan in a shortened offseason. It's a defense that finished 19th in efficiency last year, and they lost 4 starters. They're going to be without another this week in Leighton Vander Esch, their middle linebacker. Sean Lee typically fills that void when Vander Esch is routinely hurt. He's out also. So you have a pretty big void at linebacker this week. The only way Atlanta doesn't march up and down the field is if the Cowboys can generate pressure. They only got to Goff on 20% of his dropbacks on Sunday night, but I think that was more the way McVay game planned and he schemed to remove the best element of the Cowboys defense. As I mentioned, Dirk doesn't do a lot of the things that are going to put his guys in the best position to succeed. So I think Dallas's defensive front has to win that battle, but they have a chance to, because they're not going to see loads of 12. They're not going to see a ton of pre-snap motion. None of those things. You're not going to see a ton of play action. Dallas's front 4 has to get to Matt Ryan. Otherwise, there's clear advantages for the Falcons offense. It's why we've seen Atlanta in the over take some pro money this week so far. I feel like, Todd, I could be intrigued about Dallas if this somehow got to 3, though.
I was going to say, how low do you think this number actually could fall? We know it was 6.5, and you saw an initial wave of Falcons money that came in, obviously grabbing the dog for a lot of the reasons you outlined there in the handicap.
I think 4.5 is the right number, especially because Dallas is going to have 25% capacity of fans in the building. So I think 4.5 is the right number. So if it got to a spot where you could buy to 3 cheaply at a right price, that would be somewhat intriguing to me. I'm not sure we get there. But basically, when you listen to this breakdown, both offenses have a supreme advantage. And that's why we've seen this go from about 50.5 out to 52.5, 53.
Last question I want to ask you about this game. You talked about Dallas trying to get an edge with their pass rush, an injury along the offensive line for the Falcons. Jake Matthews held out of practice earlier this week. John Wetzel promoted to the active roster. Matthews has started every game or played every game since entering the league. If he's unable to go, how much does that potentially change the handicap?
I don't know if it changes the handicap, but obviously you don't want starting offensive linemen out in the key to this game if Dallas is going to have any chance of stopping Atlanta's high-powered offense, is getting to Matt Ryan. So that's kind of part of this breakdown that we already discussed. If Dallas has a chance in this game, it's because they're getting to Matt Ryan. The loss to Matthews only enhances that.
Makes a ton of sense. And breaking with tradition here, because I'm wholly incompetent in terms of putting together my notes. Normally we go through betting index order and we'll start with games in the typical Vegas rotation. We didn't quite do that here as I jumped over a game that we had planned to start with. So let's pivot back, Payne, and go take a look at the Rams-Eagles contest, where right now this number has been fascinating to try and watch. We see the Eagles a 1.5-point favorite at FanDuel. Total on this game 46, but we did see the Eagles open as much as a 3.5-point favorite at FanDuel earlier in the week. Number moved as far as the Rams to a 1.5-point favorite, so it's kind of bounced all over. The last time that Carson Wentz played the Rams, he had his MVP season derailed, left the game with a torn up knee, so imagine that left a little bit of a bad taste in his mouth. And when you look at this Eagles team, they're 25-10 at home under Coach Peterson, including the playoffs. Only the Patriots, Packers, and Chiefs have a better home record since 2016 when Peterson took over as Eagles head coach. Clearly, the Eagles were deficient last Sunday in slowing down that Washington football team pass rush. Wentz went to the turf 8 times in terms of sacks. The Eagles' offense averaged just 2.8 yards per play in the second half, being held to 90 total yards. In comes Aaron Donald. Does Philadelphia have a better game plan this week to slow down the league's most disruptive defensive player?
Very few times have I watched an Eagles game and throughout large stretches wondered, what the heck is Doug Peterson doing here? I've never been in that position before. And so it was very odd to watch this. It's almost as if Doug had been like living on the moon since early June, devising this game plan for week 1. And then he just landed back on earth right before kickoff. When you look at some of the injuries they had, where you're missing all-world guard Brandon Brooks, Lane Johnson, one of the best right tackles in football, is out. You had your starting left tackle, Andre Dillard, was out. You started a right guard you didn't think was capable enough, and that's the reason you brought in Jason Peters. And Washington has one of the best defensive lines in football. Like, why on God's earth did Carson Wentz throw deep so often? That was what was so shocking to me. Carson had the longest average intended air yards per pass of any quarterback in week 1 at 12 yards. Like, why wasn't Philadelphia employing this, like, quick pass attack? Something their offense, Todd, is typically built on, right? Get the ball out of Wentz's hands early. Don't get him killed. Negate the pass rush. You have this double-headed monster at tight end with Ertz and Goddard. Use him. Like, when Wentz targeted Dallas Goedert, he had a 151 passer rating, a 67% success rate. Jalen Reagor, you go out and you draft. Many people, like, I like him, but a lot of people thought maybe you overdraft him. Analysts thought that there was other receivers better than Reagor. But he's a good run after the catch guy, so it fit your offense. It's the reason Doug Peterson has him returning punts. Like, why wasn't he used in a couple wide receiver screens? So that has to be the first thing Doug changes this week against the Rams defense, to negate Aaron Donald and Michael Brockers, as you mentioned, because get the ball out quick. The one thing those two guys did was they got to Dak on 42% of dropbacks last week. Unless there's a setback at practice today or Friday, Miles Sanders is going to return. That should help the Eagles' quick pass game. Lane Johnson looks like he's going to potentially return as well. That's the key. Like, these guys in Philadelphia are analytically sound. They look at historical data. They know if you start 1-1, you have a 49% chance to make the playoffs. If you start 0-2, you have 11% chance. So there's about a 38% difference in making the playoffs win or lose in this game. So Lane Johnson has come out and said, like, I'm playing no matter what. We'll see how healthy he is. But when you look at this offense, Ertz, Goddard, Miles Sanders back this week, and Jalen Reagor, there is no reason not to target those guys early, often, quickly. Doug Peterson should be looking to employ those 4 guys against this Rams linebacker unit, which you kind of hinted at in the last preview we did. You got to attack the Rams linebackers. You got to attack the middle of the field. That's where the Rams are really soft. I think this is going to be a little bit of a shock to their system. You go from covering a backup tight end and Dalton Schultz to now worrying about Ertz, Goddard, and Miles Sanders. If those 3, along with Reagor, don't have at least 20 combined catches, like, this is a flawed game plan in my mind. Also, expect Deshaun Jackson to be a little bit more involved in the offensive game plan this week. He only played 54% of snaps last week. It was by design. I was told his snaps should tick up a little bit this week. So it'll be nice to get some of these offensive weapons back for the offense and a little bit healthier as well week 2.
Yeah, you look at some of the metrics that come out of last week's game. We talked obviously about Philadelphia and their offensive line. You had 3 players make their NFL debuts up front. Carson Wentz, of course, you look at the Rams. They recorded 19 pressures in their win against the Dallas Cowboys. Good enough for 3rd most in the league behind only Pittsburgh and Washington. Meanwhile, Aaron Donald, he provided 10 pressures. That was more than 13 teams during the course of week 1. When we look at the other side of the ball and we see this Rams offense, Payne, I wasn't blown away by any stretch of the imagination with what they were able to do against Dallas. Now, I know they did put up 422 yards and consistently move the ball. 40 rushing plays, 31 passing attempts. They were able to successfully convert, more than 50% of their 3rd down opportunities. Goff, though, when you look at some of his numbers, I don't want to say he's a system quarterback, but there's nothing he does out there that completely wows me. Meanwhile, on the other side, I think lost in Philadelphia's 27-17 loss was how well their defense played from start to finish. And oh, my friend, there just may happen to be a competitive advantage for Philadelphia defensively because they have the Rams' best slot cornerback wearing Philadelphia Eagles colors now.
You're spot on with everything there. And the Rams offense is a bit of a mystery to me right now. I'm not sure Sean McVay knows what he wants his offense to be, whether it's just 3 wide and chuck it with tempo offense or slow it down and bully you with 2 tight ends. But I will say this, what Sean McVay did for his offense Sunday night reminded me a little bit of his pre-Super Bowl lost days. The opening script was off the charts fantastic. Goff was operating at this breakneck speed. Once they had the lead, McVay transformed the offense into this slow it down, methodical bully ball approach. McVay didn't have the better team on the field Sunday night, but he earned the win, so I have to give him some credit there. What he did for Goff, to your point, was remarkable. The window dressing was out of this world. McVay used motion at the snap 34% of the time, most of any offense in week 1. Tons of play action to assist his franchise quarterback. That's not a franchise quarterback. 41% play action usage for Goff. That was the 3rd highest rate in week 1. McVay used 2 tight ends at the 4th highest clip. All of these little things allowed Jared Goff to be put in the best positions possible. He wasn't sacked a single time when the Rams used 2 tight end sets. He was pressured the 6th least of any quarterback, something we know that he caves under. And McVay knows that at this point. If you actually look at this, it's really funny. Goff was pressured 7 times all night, Todd. He had a 0 passer rating when the heat was on. So all the things that we have been saying about Jared Goff this entire time, it gets proven every single week. But the one thing that McVay does is force your ends and your linebackers to be disciplined with their eyes and assignments. And if they're not, it can spell trouble. And I think that's where this matchup this week gets a little bit interesting. Your hope is that Javon Hargrave is back. He returned to practice. Derek Barnett returned as well. But Vinny Curry reportedly out 4 weeks. Brandon Graham is in the concussion protocol. So there could be some issues at end. The strength of the Eagles defense, obviously, is along the line. So if there are guys missing there, it hurts. We've talked about the Eagles knowing linebacker is a devalued position, so that unit isn't great. I'm sure Sean McVay is going to be smart enough to attack the edges in the ground game and to see if potentially replacement ends can set the edge rather than running right into Fletcher Cox and Malik Jackson or maybe Javon Hargrave. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of pre-snap motion. They're going to use a lot of things to be very coy on offense to see if the Eagles linebackers are good enough to handle it. But again, I'm struggling, Todd, like trying to figure out what McVay will do here. Do you run a bunch of 12 versus a team that sees 12 all day in practice? The Eagles offense runs the most 12 in the league and have for multiple seasons. Or do you spread it out knowing that the Eagles D-line could be a little banged up and might not be able to get to Goff as much as usual? What I do know is I think this Eagles defense is very good. You hinted at this at the top that the Eagles defense was better than the scoreboard indicated last week. I know it was Washington and Dwayne Haskins who's learning a brand new system. And I guess if you're going to give him an excuse, this is really Dwayne Haskins' fifth offensive system in roughly 2 years. He went from Urban to Ryan Day to Jay Gruden to Callahan to now Scott Turner in about 24 months. But my point is Philly's defense held Washington to 3.4 yards per play. The 27 points Washington scored took a grand total of 159 yards to achieve. Every single point Washington hung on the board, the drive started in plus territory, Todd. So I think if you can get some guys back healthy, like Javon Hargraves comes back, Brandon Graham clears the concussion protocol, Derek Barnett returns, I feel a lot more comfortable with the end position, and I think the Eagles defense shows out pretty well here.
Should be one hell of a game. As we've talked at great lengths, you never want to overreact to what you saw week one, and you obviously don't want to underreact. We'll see if these teams both end up 1-1 coming out of week two, if the Rams can really get off to a big-time start with back-to-back wins over NFC East opponents, or if it'll be Philadelphia righting the wrongs from a week ago. From the early slate to the late slate, it takes us out to SoFi Stadium, where it's the Kansas City Chiefs traveling to take on the Los Angeles Chargers. You're looking at the Chiefs, 8.5-point road favorites at FanDuel. Total in this game, 47.5. And Payne, when you look at last season, road favorites of 7 points or more compiled a record of 15-8 against the spread. If we happen to back the 49ers out of that, who were 0-2 in the roll, the rest of the league went 15-6 against the number during that stretch. And when you look at Kansas City, I mean, this is a team that's absolutely been dominant, not only from a point spread perspective, but also within their division. They've now beaten their division rival, the Chargers, 11 out of the last 12 meetings. And you give Andy Reid extra time to prepare for this Chargers defense that's traveling from the East Coast or Midwest, whatever the hell we want to call it, back west. How do the Chargers begin going about devising a game plan to defend this new-look Kansas City offense?
I'm not quite sure, and I'm really intrigued to see what Kansas City's offense truly looks like. They played really slow and methodical. They were 27th in pace week one. The Chiefs' offense was really controlled. Mahomes didn't record a single explosive pass. The first three quarters before you get to garbage time, the Chiefs passed just 57% of the time. Last year, the Chiefs were the most pass-happy team in that same environment. First three quarters, they threw a league-high 66% of the time. So I'm not really sure what to expect offensively from the Chiefs because that's a pretty drastic style change. What I will say, and to your point here, it's perfect. Expect some things we haven't seen. Andy Reid with extra time is difficult to defend. With the shortened off season, we've said expect some larger than normal changes the first few weeks, really where this is a time where we don't want to overreact, and I completely agree with that. But in this type of environment with the shortened off season, week 1 to 2, we might see more changes than we routinely see in normal years. But it's a bonus that Andy Reid gets a few extra days for a critical division game. He's already the far superior coach to Anthony Lynn. But let's say Clyde Edwards-Helaire continues to carry the load and the Chiefs become a little more of a running team. I think long term that's probably pretty good, right? It just provides another way you can beat other teams in games that matter most. Just something else that you probably have to scheme for defensively, spend more time trying to stop during the week, which means less time preparing for Mahomes, which is a positive as well. But what was shocking to me, Todd, is when you look at the Chargers defense, they went out this offseason, paid up for Linval Joseph to help plug the middle of their defense to be this run stuff or something the Chargers really hadn't had in prior seasons and where they struggled. The Chargers face one of the worst O-lines in the league, and the worst part of the Bengals O-line is the interior. They were pushed around at times if you go back and watch that game closely. Cincinnati had 4.4 carry, 54% rushing success rate. The one element of this team that was supposed to be really good this year was Gus Bradley's defense. They're familiar with the system. They added some guys via the draft, and then again, Linval Joseph. You thought that this was going to be a really organized defense, and it was the complete opposite. The Chargers had multiple blown coverages that Joe Burrow in game one of his career with receivers he didn't get much of an offseason with couldn't capitalize on some of those blown coverages. That's not going to be the case this week. Mahomes and company are going to take advantage of all those errors. If you provide them, it's a fast track. This is a really tough matchup for the Chargers this week.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, you try and figure out how the Chargers can go about devising a game plan here. And if you can't, well, I should say, we've seen in the past, if you're going to beat Kansas City, it's not because you can slow down what they do offensively. It's because you can keep up scoring the football with them. And when you look at this Chargers team, I mean, they ran the ball on nearly 55% of their plays last week, the third highest ground percentage in Anthony Lynn's 49 regular season games as a coach. But oftentimes, Payne, I mean, they were behind the chains. They struggled in short yardage. They had 4 3-and-out drives in their 13 possessions. And when you look at Joshua Kelly and Austin Eckler, yeah, they ran the ball 31 times for 144 yards. But for me, and I didn't watch the game from start to finish, Tyrod Taylor could only complete passes when receivers were wide open. He didn't throw his receivers open. He didn't get Keenan and Allen involved in the game nearly enough. And all of a sudden, yes, we know the Chiefs' run defense isn't exactly the strength of what that stop unit can do, but they are much better in the secondary. Do the Chargers have enough firepower to even keep up in this football game?
Well, it's good that we're on the same page because you saw the same things that I saw, and I didn't watch most of the first half, but did catch pretty much all of the second half. And the Chargers offense didn't impress me. The passing game was interesting, let's just put it that way. Tyrod wasn't accurate. The ball was sailing on him, but he connected on a few deep balls, as you alluded to, where guys were just wide open. So overall, when you look at Tyrod's completion percentage, it was less than expectation, so not good. But shockingly, he had the second highest intended air yards of any quarterback week one. In all the years of data that we have on Tyrod, he wasn't the best deep thrower. He was never really aggressive or wanted to push the ball downfield. That's never been the strength of his game. It's always been take what the defense gives you, don't turn it over. So when we didn't see him take advantage of those guys that were open underneath, it was very odd. What I did kind of expect was Tyrod using his mobility. And I have to be honest, he looked like he was a 31-year-old quarterback. He had 6 carries for 7 yards, couldn't get to the edge like we've seen in the past, couldn't keep his footing other times. He wasn't nearly as mobile or athletic as the last time we saw Tyrod getting meaningful starter reps. So if the wins don't keep stacking up, I think we probably see a change at quarterback sooner than I probably envisioned. The 3 explosive passes really distorted how bad the Chargers offense was down to down. More than 44% of the Chargers passing offense, Todd, came on 3 plays. So likely the ones where you saw guys streaking like wide open. When you look at the down to down success, Cincinnati was actually 9% better than the Chargers were in success rate and net success rate. The Chargers were only successful in 39% of their pass attempts. So I'm not sure that kind of offensive performance can be replicated, really. Even the Chargers' ground game, it's really tough to gauge that going against a defense that had Geno Atkins out, DJ Reader and Mike Daniels left with injuries. So it's obviously easier to run the ball, against a team when their top 3 interior linemen are out or missing significant stretches. The other thing that we'll introduce here that you probably won't hear most places this week is the familiarity between Tyrod and Chiefs defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo. They spent 2 years together in Baltimore back in 2013 and 14. If there's anyone that knows Tyrod's strengths and weaknesses, it's Spags. And that was on full display back in 2015. Spags gets a promotion, becomes the Giants defensive coordinator. Tyrod also gets a promotion, becomes the Bills starting quarterback. They play each other that year. Spags' defense held Tyrod's offense to 10 points. Tyrod had an 18 QBR, and for reference, average QBR is about 50. The somewhat phony offensive performance, I will say, the Chargers put up in week one, because if you just look at yards, like, ooh, pretty good. I think with Spags' familiarity and the more methodical approach with increased running from KC, those factors there are why we've seen this total dip as well, Todd.
It's an interesting football game. When you look at this Chargers team, I'm not quite sure what to make of them. Week 1 sure as shit, in my opinion, didn't say a whole heck of a lot. We know who the Chiefs are, at least we think we do. But at the top, you talked about them being more methodical, and it was a lot like the Chiefs we saw at the tail end of the regular season last year. They ran a slower pace. They committed to the ground game. It wasn't until the playoffs when they found themselves trailing against the Houston Texans and against the Tennessee Titans that they really opened up their playbook. So it'll be interesting to see against a division team that knows that, or I should say the two teams know each other pretty well. Into the nightcap, Payne, it'll take us out to the Pacific Northwest for one of the more fascinating games of the entire weekend, where the Seattle Seahawks will welcome in the New England Patriots. You're looking at Seattle, a 4-point favorite at FanDuel. Total in this game, 44.5. New England is set to be an underdog for the first time since the 2018 AFC Championship game at the Chiefs. First time in the regular season they'll be an underdog since week 1 of 2016 when Jimmy Garoppolo took over for suspended Tom Brady. And when you look at point spreads as indicators, I think some fascinating notes here before we get into the X's and O's. Seattle, for everything that we say about this team and their home field advantage, yes, they're 12-6 straight up the last 18 they've played in their own building, but they're just 6-11-1 against the number as a home favorite since 2017. But when you talk about Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson in prime time, when the lights are the brightest, this seems to be when the two of them shine. Russell Wilson, 25-7-1 straight up, 22-9-2 against the number under the lights. When you look at these two teams, Payne, and I think talking about New England's offense against Seattle's defense makes the most logical place to start. The Patriots ran the ball 67% of the time, by far the highest rate in week 1, and their highest in a game since week 17, way back in 2008. There's now a little bit of tape on Cam Newton. Is it rinse and repeat for New England, or is it going to be a game of misdirection that we see week in, week out until teams have a lot more information to go off of in terms of how Josh McDaniels chooses to employ Cam Newton's talents?
I think we're still learning. But if you're Belichick, if you're Cam or a Patriots fan, you have to be happy with the opening game because Cam looked healthy. Cam looked athletic and mobile. Now, I'm not sure he can survive the season operating at a 240 carry pace. When you think about that, only 14 running backs last year had 240 carries. If this is truly a one-year relationship where Belichick and Cam use each other, maybe the carry rate mirrors something close to what we saw game 1. But if these guys agree to a little longer-term deal, and I'm hearing that could be possible, the running probably regresses a touch, if you catch my drift. Like, you know, you're going to treat a sports car that you own a little better than the one you rent for the weekend. So I want to see what this looks like in week 2. 14 carries is a lot. But Cam was accurate when he did throw it. Once you remove throwaways, Cam actually completed 15 of 16 qualifying throws. The unit we called upon this offseason, Todd, was the Patriots O-line. We said they were the best part of this offense. They needed to be physical all season. They needed to be dominant. And they bullied Brian Flores' defense. Patriots had 5.2 a carry, 67% rushing success rate, along with 7 explosive runs for the Patriots offense. I know that ate at Flores. The other element of New England's offense that was pretty predictable was an extremely methodical pace. New England was the slowest offense in week 1. They took nearly 33 seconds to run a play. That was 6 seconds slower than league average. So we had a slow team. We had a run-first team. When they did pass, it was a lot of short, quick passes. Cam released the ball at the 5th quickest rate, and he only completed 2 passes outside the hashes greater than 10 yards down the field. I do think we see some wrinkles to your question at the top. And it's got to probably be this week. And maybe because of game flow, New England's forced to come out of their shell a little bit. I think it's really important that Seattle tries to build a lead and not allow the Patriots to play slow and just hand it off. I know Seattle did well stopping the run against Atlanta, allowed 3.4 carry, but New England's ground game, certainly a different animal there. It's week 2, so we're still using some data from last season to form our opinion. But last year, Seattle finished 23rd in defensive rush efficiency. They lose one of the best run-setting edges in Clowney, and Quentin Jefferson leaves as well. It's tough for me to believe that Seattle's defensive line is anything probably but below average, I would think. It's important that Ken Norton Jr. continues to be aggressive with Bobby Wagner and Jamal Adams this week, keep them closer to the line of scrimmage, run blitzes. If you look at week 1, Norton really tried to help his defensive line. I think he knows it's a weakness. He sent 7% more blitzes against Atlanta than Seattle averaged in 2019. Wagner and Adams were sent on blitzes a combined 16 times. So it's important that you force Cam and the Patriots offense to operate outside the phone booth, right? Force Cam to throw outside in the intermediate to deep areas. And if New England's going to beat you doing that with N'Keal Harry and Damari Byrd and Jacoby Myers, I think you tip your cap, Todd.
Yeah, you obviously want to take away plan A and force the Patriots to beat you with plan B, and if they can execute that, so be it. You mentioned the Seahawks and some of their struggles. They've allowed an NFL worst 5.9 yards per carry to opposing quarterbacks since the start of last season. Rushing yards per game allowed since the start of last year. 20th. Rushing touchdowns allowed since the start of last year. 30th. You look at Jamal Adams. He did make a little bit of an impact, finished the game with 12 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack against the Falcons. His presence may allow Seattle to bring some pressure from its defensive backfield. Be interesting to see how he continues to be employed. Meanwhile, on the other side, Payne, we saw the Seahawks finally take the shackles off Russell Wilson, allow him to throw the ball on early downs. 21 of Seattle's first 35 offensive plays in Week 1 were passes. This is a team that went 3 for 9 on third down, but 4 for 4 in the red zone in Week 1. They ran the ball just 35% of the time, the lowest rate by a team that actually won a game to start the season, compared to last year when they ran the ball 46% of the time, which was the 6th highest rate in the NFL. The Patriots defense was a unit I know we talked about in the preseason podcast, being concerned about how it would look with some key contributors opting out. This is going to be a much different test facing an MVP candidate in Russell Wilson than what they encountered last week at home against the Miami Dolphins.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But what's interesting is Pete Carroll talked this week about getting the ground game going. Now, he's been throwing out dummies all off season about this, and maybe he's trying to play coy, but we're going to find out how committed Schottenheimer and Pete are to this new style of offense. We grazed this topic Monday, but Brian and Pete let Russ throw early and often. Seattle went 67% pass on early downs. That was 16% more than Seattle averaged last season. Now, it's only one game, and it's against the Falcons secondary we don't respect, so probably that should have been the game plan anyways. But by allowing Russ to throw more in early downs, it just puts him in a better position to succeed. And if you look, Russ's expected completion percentage was 75% Week 1, meaning, based on the play, where the receivers were, the separation the receivers got, it all equated to Russ being expected to complete 75% of his throws. Last year, Russ was expected to complete 61%. It tells you the design of the play and the calling of the plays go much better when they aren't obvious, right? Which happens when you throw in early downs. Results, in just this better baseline for success. But what's really telling is if you put an elite quarterback in position to succeed, he's going to blow through all the expectations. And that's what happened. And again, I know it's Atlanta's defense and it's Atlanta's secondary, but Russ was expected to complete those 75% of passes. He overshot that mark by 14%. If you look at 2019, expected to complete 61%, he only overshoots it by 5%. Good players make coaches look smart, but if smart coaches can get the most out of their best players by putting them in positions, they end up being elite. And for 60 minutes, that's what happened with Brian Schottenheimer and Russell Wilson. You're hoping that it's going to continue. The pass game became, it almost felt, Todd, like this happy medium, right? We know Schottenheimer likes to run. We know Pete likes to run. But the pass game became an extension a little bit of the ground game. Russ only averaged 5.3 intended air yards per pass. That was the 6th lowest in the league. But bottom line, it worked. This is also the first time Russ has 2 high-end receivers to work with as well. So let's see if that translates to Sunday night against Belichick's defense. Your hope is that, Shotty and Pete don't try to, get in a mud fight with Belichick trying to slow this game down. You don't want Shotty and Pete resorting back to their old ways because the game ends up being a grinder or something along those lines. This is the type of game, and I touched on it on the other side of the ball, is you want to keep passing. You want to force Cam and New England's offense to play catch-up, even against a strong Patriots secondary, right? We broke that narrative down a little bit on the AFC East preview, if you remember, Todd. And it was that the first 8 weeks of the season last year, New England's defense didn't play a soul, right? They played offenses that didn't rank better than 20th in efficiency. That first 8 weeks, the average offense New England faced was 27th in efficiency, but the final 8 weeks, the level of opposing offense New England faced was actually pretty good. It jumped to an average of 14th. Suddenly, New England's defense went from allowing 31% of passes to great success for the first 8 weeks to allowing 46% of passes. So now there's no Patrick Chung, there's no Daron Harmon. Seattle needs to attack through the air. Don't be intimidated by perception. And I think that's the way Seattle goes out and potentially wins this game is you employ Russ to throw the ball early, force Cam in that offense to play catch up, something they're probably not as comfortable doing when, again, you look at some of the weapons they have outside.
Should be a fun watch. There's no doubt about it. We think we have an idea of what the Seahawks are and who they're going to be this season as they continue to morph into a little bit more of a pass-first offense with Russell Wilson. And we'll see the ongoing evolution in New England. You mentioned it with Cam Newton and the workload that they put on not only his shoulder but also his legs, if that's sustainable over the course of a 16-week regular season, especially in prime time. We do have one other game to get to, Payne. That, of course, Thursday Night Football between the Cleveland Browns and the Cincinnati Bengals. But before we do that, we want to get a little bit of perspective from the other side of the counter. Thrilled to introduce our next guest, the first time on the Bet the Board podcast, but he will be a regular throughout the course of football season. You can follow John Sheeran on Twitter at JSheeran1981. And John, I know we talked to you before coming on the show, and we're going to try and introduce your title and everything else, but I feel that's a luxury I have to give you. So why don't you share with our audience exactly what your title is and what some of your day-to-day responsibilities are around the FanDuel Sportsbook?
Yeah, sure. Great to be here first and foremost, Todd. Really excited to kind of partner up with you guys for the season and share with your listeners some of the insights of what we're seeing on the other side of the counter throughout NFL season. Look, yeah, as you said, I'm the director of the FanDuel Sportsbook. We're based in the New Jersey office. And basically what we do is we look after effectively all the odds making, all the liability management for all of the markets that we offer across all of the sports that we own here in the US. And that's effectively the core US sports. The rest of our content is managed by our colleagues in Dublin and Australia. And that's part of a wider global risk and trading function that we have under the Flutter umbrella, which now represents multiple brands across the globe. So, and that's pretty much the day-to-day, just kind of, making sure that we have the content up, working with regulators to get new content approved, and then working on our own kind of projects internally, which involve, building out sports models with our analytics teams and surfacing new product to customers and giving them the choice, which is kind of one of our main goals, to give consumers more markets than anybody else and give them the ability to be able to bet on it, whatever it is that they want, and not just the culturally standard core markets and stuff like that. We want to develop player props and give people that choice that I spoke about.
Payne, do you want to warn John what he's getting himself into now, or should we let him figure it out episode by episode at this point?
Yeah, I think we just let him figure it out. John, how long have you been in New Jersey?
I've been here since we launched the New Jersey Sportsbook, which was in July of 2018. So I'm 2 years here. My history is obviously all in Ireland. I'm Irish, obviously, with the accent. So my background is basically all through Paddy Power beforehand, where I was predominantly kind of tasked with horse racing, actually. So moving into this space was an exciting one and challenging one, a steep learning curve for sure.
The biggest question we'll ask you is how's the food here?
Yeah, I won't lie, and I'm not, I'm not the healthiest guy in the world, but yeah, I find it a struggle compared to at home for sure. There's a lot, portion sizes are much bigger, so I'm actually on a detox for the last 2 weeks. My wife will account for that.
I mean,
Yeah.
Payne, you're going to have to convince John that if he's going to be a regular member of this podcast, we're going to have to send him a box of Lara bars, but we'll let him pick the particular flavor if he's going to fit in perfectly with the Bet the Board family.
Lara bars and green juice, John.
I've never heard of either of them, I won't lie.
We'll have to ship you up some.
Yeah, we'll get you acclimated slowly, but that's a great place to start. And like we said, we're thrilled to have you in the fold. We know there'll be plenty of social interaction with our loyal audience. So if you guys have questions, as we said, hit up John on Twitter at JSheeran1981. That's SHEERAN 1981. John, when you look at opening weekend for the National Football League, a lot of people were a little bit worried in terms of how bettors would respond, knowing that we had an uncertain offseason, no preseason. In terms of handle, how did things work out for you guys? And in regards to some of the bigger winners and losers decision-wise, what were some of the games that helped the sports book while also hurt?
Yeah, I mean, overall, we were delighted with the handle. We've seen it since the return to sports, Todd. You know, that there was that pent-up demand from bettors. We saw it in MLB opening night, obviously highlighted by the Yankees and the Nationals, and then through the NBA bubble. It's been incredible, the growth. And in fact, from existing customers, not just new people coming to betting, people had that pent-up demand, as we said, and you know, expressed it in their betting. For NFL specifically last weekend, you know, we were only looking back at 2018, our first season here, and I can tell you that in week 1 of 2018 NFL season, we did 4 million handle in New Jersey alone at that stage. We're obviously now in 10 states, but when I look back and thought back to it, I was like, man, this business is huge at $4 million. We had 3 games last weekend, 4 games actually, that went over that number alone just on the game handle itself. So, you know, we were up to about 50 million in handle last weekend across all of the games, and expect that to kind of continue to rise as we roll out new states. I'd be very surprised if that's not you know, more than 100 grand, more than double that next year, or 100 million, sorry, next year.
It's always great to hear. We know the NFL is king and everybody else just kind of falls in line behind the National Football League, whether it's college football, obviously the NBA playoffs in full speed. Payne won't acknowledge that there's actually a championship going on in the NHL because hockey is apparently beneath him. So we don't tend to get into that. When you look at the way that
the Penguins season is over, the NHL season is over for me.
Well, your Penguin seasons have ended a lot earlier than anticipated the last couple of years. Sidney Crosby's one step closer to retirement home than he might be to another Stanley Cup.
How's Vegas doing?
Vegas is on the golf course right alongside your Penguins, but I don't really want to talk about it. So we're going to ask John questions. This isn't a chance for you to take jabs at our Golden Knights, who flamed out in a 5-game debacle against the Stars. John, before we get into some of the bigger decisions and what you guys have seen behind the counter for this weekend, 1 week in the books, it's always interesting to kind of gauge where some of the futures liability is going into the season. Some of the teams we've known over in the past, hey, people love to bet a long shot, and they see that big number out there. You don't actually worry when you have 6-figure liability going to the Jacksonville Jaguars, of course, although want to know who knows. What have you guys seen in the way of some of the division bets, season-long stuff, you know, anything from the casual gamblers that they've gravitated towards compared to a little bit of the sharper action?
Yeah, I mean, we saw a ton of action on all of the futures, Todd, to be fair. The regular season wins were super interesting. Saw a lot of heat on the Steelers, and I looked into it and actually kind of regretted that we weren't a game higher. We were over 9 with a flat 9. Obviously, they went 8-8 last year, you know, with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph. Now you've got Ben back. You've got a second season defense with Minkah Fitzpatrick, and we saw what they were capable, basically rode them to being in contention right down to the last week last year. And we saw a lot of heat on the over 9, and I'd be very surprised if we do any better than giving those customers their money back. The schedule looked really good for them, and that was one that was probably a little bit slow to move on our side. In the championship outright, the Super Bowl, unsurprisingly, everybody was jumping on Tom Brady. I mean, we laid odds right down from 49-1, obviously before he committed to Tampa Bay, all the way down to 15-1, which is where they were before they went to the Saints last weekend. We have almost $2 million in liability on them already. I expect that to continue to come. You know, I don't know. In fact, I do know that there isn't that much sharp money on them at 15-1. I would say it's more just public demand following Tom Brady, and obviously what they did around, you know, the signings that they made and how, you know, potentially strong they look on offense with the options and weapons that they have. So that was definitely the one. It didn't matter what market. I think if I'd have put the Buccaneers up to win the Stanley Cup, we probably would have laid that as well.
John, when we're looking at week 2, I know it's only Thursday, but are there any big decisions that are already brewing for this weekend? There's some late games with the Chiefs and Ravens that look like they have the potential to be really lopsided.
Yeah, we've got 2 really lopsided books already. Unsurprisingly, you've got one of them. The Chiefs is definitely won 98% of the money that we've taken so far, and that's not an insignificant amount. Is all on the Chiefs. 8.5 right now. It's hard to see that line coming back any way at all. You know, 8.5 is probably the best you'll do. So if you did like it, and it's, you know, hard not to like it, as in the matchup looks a pretty good one for them, I would take it sooner rather than later. The other one is probably a bigger position. That's on the Niners, giving a touchdown to the Jets. I talked about it earlier today. We've had 9,300 bets in that market. 8,932 of them are on the 49ers covering. So a huge swing there. The Jets covering will be an amazing result for us already. And that's another one that, despite injury concerns to Sherman and obviously George Kittle hyperextending his knee, the Jets look completely anemic in Buffalo to me, and we're really flattered to get back to just a 10-point loss. That game probably grades out more like a 21-point loss than 10. So they're the two. The Chargers offense obviously looked pretty poor as well against the Bengals, and it's not hard to see the Chiefs blowing them out of the water, having looked so efficient back off a break.
Those numbers, Payne, are absolutely staggering. Hearing John talk about how little faith those folks in Jersey and throughout some of the other FanDuel markets have in the Jets' ability to bounce back, given what we saw on Sunday. We'll have to see where that number goes. Are you surprised at all, Payne, that it's that lopsided?
I am a little surprised, yeah. I mean, I just think when you're – it stuns me that you could have a game that's that lopsided, but I think John hit – the nail on the head there. When you actually dig into the box score of Buffalo and the Jets, that game was extremely lopsided. The final score didn't really indicate what truly happened on the field. John, I'm going to pitch it back to you before I have Todd close this out. When we're looking at week 2, have you seen any early professional money enter the market?
Yeah, it's a good question. And obviously, it can be hard to decipher sometimes. I think one that interested me a lot was some money that we saw for the Detroit Green Bay total. I think it was to go over 49. We saw a couple of sharp guys that I respect having come in on the over in that game, so that's probably one. We had a pretty strong position paying against the Rams on the line. We actually opened it on Sunday evening at the Eagles, favored by 3.5. Probably one we would want back, particularly given some of the injury concerns in Philly. I know Carson Wentz had a shocking performance, even relative to the kind of pressure that he was put under. I saw some charts on analytics where he kind of fell off the edge of the globe. And, obviously with Aaron Donald coming back that way as well, and we saw what he did on Sunday night to the Cowboys, I have concerns about it. But overall, last night, with a lot of books, the Rams were favoured on the road in Philly. Coming cross-country off the back of Sunday night, albeit a positive performance when the Eagles were pretty poor, just felt like too much of a shift for us. So we've gone back to the Eagles favoured by -1.5 this morning. I would say that we saw some professional money on the Eagles as a dog at home when it did get that far. So I'd be surprised if we see the Eagles as dog come kickoff, and like I said, we're giving them laying them -1.5 right now.
I mean, Payne, we laid the screws to John this morning. I think he did pretty well for his debut appearance on the Bet the Board podcast with all the rapid fire stuff that we like to put on everybody's plate if they're going to come in and step into the hot zone.
Yeah, John absolutely crushed it.
Yeah. John, can't thank you. And
I was just going to say you let me off pretty easy, guys.
Yeah, well, you know what? Every now and again, we have to try and let you get in. Feel comfortable. We'll ask you some of the hard-hitting questions, but thrilled to have you as a part of the show all season long. I know our listeners are really going to appreciate it. They love getting some of those nuggets and the tidbits about some of the liability professional positions. Again, encourage everybody to follow John on Twitter at Sheeran1981. That's JSHEERAN 1981. He is the director of trading for the FanDuel Sportsbook, and he'll be joining us every single Thursday throughout the course of the fall. We'll have to put a little pressure on him, maybe get him into the college football fold on Wednesdays, but we like everybody to be able to walk before they can run. John, best of luck this weekend, and as we said, looking forward to having you on every week throughout the fall.
Appreciate it, guys. Enjoyed it.
Some pretty interesting stuff from John there, Payne. I was surprised to hear how big of New York Jet fans they're going to be this weekend, given the early lopsided ticket count and liability starting to mount up on an undermanned, depleted San Francisco 49ers roster.
Apparently, Jets fans have thrown in the towel after 1 week. They want Adam Gase out of there. It's getting ugly.
I mean, they wanted Adam Gase out of there, I think, before the season even started. And I imagine for an offense that looked to be in a coma for the better part of 3 quarters, it's not going to get significantly better with Le'Veon Bell now expected to miss a few games. But on the other side, I mean, San Francisco...
How fun is that going to be, by the way? We're going to get to see the Frank Gore show. Adam Gase loves Frank Gore.
Honestly, I want to see Frank Gore play until he's 65 years old. I mean, the fact that this guy is still in the league is simply incredible.
He's shooting for the all-time rushing record. He's coming after Emmett.
The durability he's shown, I think, is a credit to... I'm not even sure what I'm going to credit it and attribute it to, because he doesn't wow you with anything he does from a dynamic running standpoint or game-breaking potential. But you know what? One of the best skill sets you can have, and we talk about all the time in the NFL, is being available to play every single Sunday, and Frank Gore is the poster child for just that.
One thing I will say in regards to Frank Gore: the guy's a worker, the guy's a grinder, and I know people busted his balls when he got drafted and the Wonderlic score started to leak of him scoring a 3. But in terms of football IQ, it's off the charts. The way he runs, the style in which he runs, and his vision has always been elite. And that's the one thing that Frank Gore has done really well. His football IQ and his vision are absolutely off the charts for the running back position.
Well, not like a game that I want to dive into by any stretch of the imagination, but the 49ers, of course, were disappointing week 1. Not disappointing for us, as we gave out the Cardinals as our best bet, plus the 7 in that spot. But San Francisco had 2 healthy cornerbacks at practice on Wednesday. It's an offense down playmakers. Were you surprised that this number didn't adjust at all in terms of week over week, given what we saw from both teams in week 1?
Not really. I think the coaching matchup is that lopsided. It'll be interesting to see where this ultimately settles. Opened at some spots lower than others, but we can call it a consensus 6 open this week. We're out to 6.5, soft 7. I'm intrigued to see where this ultimately goes. I don't know if there's a reason, if you were to back the Jets, to jump in now. Let's just put it that way.
It's a very fair assessment. Hope the public continues to run it up. And John further supported that, talking about 90+% of the tickets coming in on the road favorite in this particular spot. Last but not least, in terms of the big game breakdowns that we'll have on the show for you today, as always, all content and numbers provided courtesy of FanDuel. And when you're looking at the Browns, a 6.5-point home favorite on a short week, playing host to the Cincinnati Bengals. Total on this game, 43.5. Payne, 3 days for 2 young, relatively inexperienced coaches to prepare game plans on the heels of very different losses. The Bengals heartbreak because Randy Bullock pulls up lame, missing a 31-yard field goal in the waning seconds against the Chargers. Meanwhile, on the other side, the Cleveland Browns, well, they weren't really competitive against the Baltimore Ravens, getting absolutely bludgeoned by their division rivals. I guess the bigger question is, which team needs to rebound faster and why? And what's one of the matchups that you're most intrigued to see play out on the field on Thursday night?
Unlike you, I'm actually looking forward to this game tonight.
So am I. I am for all the wrong reasons.
It's really intriguing.
I am for all the wrong reasons. It's not because I see either of these teams as Super Bowl contenders. You know, we were higher on the Browns than some, and I openly admit I didn't watch Joe Burrow as closely as I should have in his debut, so I think seeing how he responds in a short week will speak volumes about what he can expect to achieve as the franchise quarterback there in Cincinnati.
The Battle of Ohio. You get rookie Joe Burrow, who's the first overall pick. You get an interesting wow team in the Browns. I think this is an intriguing matchup tonight. When we talk about Burrow and the Bengals offense, it was one of the worst passing performances week 1. And now they're facing one of the very worst performances of defensive passing in week 1 in Cleveland. So one of the very worst passing offenses week 1 versus the very worst passing defense of week 1. So something's got to give. I don't think either of the outings were a surprise. We covered how banged up the injured Browns secondary was in the breakdown last Thursday. On the AFC North preview, we said Burrow would probably start a little slow. It's impossible for a rookie quarterback to hit the ground running with this kind of offseason. And then you layer in the fact that both John Ross and A.J. Green missed massive stretches of camp. It only made matters worse. Burrow left a lot out there against the Chargers, and we talked about that Chargers defense already. 3 of his misses could have been touchdowns, especially one to A.J. Green early in the third quarter. A.J. didn't have a defender within 25 yards of him. That was how bad the blown coverage was from the Chargers. On the day, Burrow completed 45% of his throws of 10 or more yards, so he wasn't very good in the intermediate to deep stuff. Zach Taylor did do a commendable job making some of his throws easier with the short stuff. You could see Burrow and his receivers, weren't really on the same page with timing. And then I watched the second half, then I put myself through it again, and I watched the full game on the sped up rewind. And what I saw with my eyes aligned with the metrics. So Burrow released the ball at the sixth fastest clip in week 1. Roughly 2.3 seconds the ball was out of his hands on average, and for good reason, right? The offensive line isn't very good. But Burrow's average intended air yards was the 11th highest of 32 quarterbacks. So Burrow was releasing the ball quickly while throwing it far. And so it didn't really mesh. It's tough to be overly accurate doing that, and you see why the Bengals didn't record a single explosive pass, and Burrow averaged 5.4 yards per pass attempt. I don't know if that gets cleaned up on a short week with some travel. But the main issue, and it shouldn't surprise anyone, was the pressure on Burrow. And that's likely where the side of the ball, this matchup, is decided tonight. The Bengals O-line will be probably in the running for one of the league's worst, even with Jonah Williams back. Burrow was pressured on 39% of his dropbacks. It was the 7th highest rate Sunday. His adjusted completion percentage when pressured was 33%. So not good. Only 4 quarterbacks were worse week 1. And if you look at the strength of the Browns defense right now, it's their line. We said that was the strength in the preview last week against Baltimore. We talked about guys like Sheldon Richardson coming out and saying that this was going to be an elite defensive line, that he was going to have a season to remember. He was so happy to be in the same team for 2 straight years. If there was a positive to take away from week 1 for Cleveland, it was those guys up front. They pressured Lamar on 48% of his dropbacks. Cleveland did a fantastic job holding the most efficient ground game in the NFL to 3.6 a carry and a 40% success rate. Those are wins against Lamar in Baltimore. The problem was the secondary got torched. And as much as we think Joe Woods has a chance to turn the Browns secondary around, it's not going to be until I think there's a little more health in the secondary. I don't know, Greedy Williams, he hasn't played yet. Practice, iffy. Delpit, we know, is out. Kevin Johnson was out. So it's tough to lose 3 guys that you really depend on simultaneously and overcome that. If you look in terms of defensive pass efficiency, Cleveland was not only the worst in week 1, but they were nearly 2 times as bad as the second worst pass defense. So if Burrow has some time, he's probably going to have opportunities to make plays against the Cleveland secondary, but it's on the Browns front 4 to shut down the run game, remove Mixon, then force Burrow into these known passing situations, and then eat against the porous Bengals pass blocking unit. A lot of people like to ball watch. We're in that fantasy era, Todd. But this is going to be decided up front. See who's winning the line of scrimmage. When you watch this, don't focus on the ball. Look at the Browns' defensive line versus the Bengals' offensive line. And I think that ultimately decides who's going to win this matchup on this side of the ball.
Well, you mentioned the run game, and we know that Cleveland would love to establish a ground and pound mentality. We saw almost an equal timeshare between Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb a week ago. Game script, of course, played a little bit of a role in that, I'm sure. 138 yards of the pedestrian variety, average more than 5 yards per carry. But I guess the one takeaway is it seems to be way too often for this Browns team, Payne, is Baker Mayfield and what he's not doing out there. 18 of 29 for a 167 passer rating. For 167 yards, a passer rating of 74 when not targeting Odell Beckham. But when you look at his full body of work, finishes 21 of 39, 189 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Quarterback rating 65. Only 5 of OBJ's 10 targets were considered catchable in the grand scheme of things. If you're Kevin Stefanski, how do you go about building a game plan, making sure you're playing to this team's strengths, and putting a quarterback that clearly is having a crisis of confidence, whether he wants to admit it or not, in a place that he can get back to where he was for the final 8 games 2 years ago under Freddie Kitchens' direction?
I'm not one to overreact. 60 minutes, almost irrelevant. I fully believe in sample size, even in a sport like the NFL that doesn't really cater to sample size. I think in saying that, this is a monster game for Baker Mayfield. If he doesn't perform better in this spot, or even specifically next week, which I think is probably even a better spot, we're probably going to have to stop believing he can be a starting caliber quarterback.
Case Keenum, get Case going, baby. He knows Stefanski. Let's go.
Yeah, I'm all for giving Baker time to learn a new system, and we know Baker had to learn Hughes, and then Freddie's, and then Munkin's, and now Stefanski's system over a 3-year period. But most of Baker's issues are the same now as they were then. He had 7 passes batted down against Baltimore. And to your point there, it's like I divulged what my source from Cleveland said on last Thursday's podcast, how Case Keenum looked better in camp running the second-team offense against the first-team defense than Baker did running the ones against the Browns' second-team defense. It's the reason we didn't jump on Cleveland, Todd, despite some of our guys doing it. That was a line that went from 8.5, 9 to a close of like 6.8. When I went back and rewatched and then looked at all the metrics to compare, Baker had a ton of help against Baltimore. We know the Ravens secondary is lights out, but Baker got help from his O-line. Baker had a great, ground game to pass off of. On first and second down, Cleveland's rushing attack went for 5.4 carry and a 46% success rate, added 5 explosive runs. Mind you, early downs are the most difficult downs to run on. And so Cleveland ran on early downs and did it well against what we project probably to be a top 5 defense in Baltimore. You look at pressure rate. Baker was pressured on just 28% of his dropbacks. A handful of the pressures, Baker caused himself running into them. All he needed to do is step into the pocket, but he likes this thing where he fades back, and it's not the best way to evade pressure. When Baker was pressured, he had the 5th worst passer rating of any quarterback week 1. When Baker was kept clean as a whistle, 5th worst passer rating week 1. So Baker had a supportive ground game. He had good pass protection in front of him, and he still screwed the pooch. The one thing that was a little interesting was all the 12 personnel we thought Stefanski would use. He didn't use enough of it. He scattered some things with 21 and 13. And so it was very weird from that perspective. I want to see more 12 personnel because Baker seems to thrive in that for some reason. He was fantastic, again, throwing from 12. But on downs where it was easiest to throw, which were the earliest downs against Baltimore, Baker only averaged 4.4 yards an attempt, so he's got to be better there. I think Baker gets a help again tonight when you're looking at this. It's tough to envision Cleveland's ground game not doing well. Geno Atkins is out for Cincy. Mike Daniels won't play. So 2 key cogs on the interior of the Bengals line. Fortunately, DJ Reader's injury was just a severe cramp. So false alarm on being carted off the field on Sunday. It was a miraculous recovery. It was just a cramp. So that was big. Baker really needs to get his tight ends involved here. I know it's unfortunate David Njoku is lost for the season, but whether it's Austin Hooper or now Harrison Bryant, the rookie from FAU, there's likely going to be some opportunity against the Bengals linebacking group. They've struggled in coverage the last few seasons. Week 1, they allowed the 2nd most receiving yards to tight ends. Hunter Henry dominated, 9.1 a catch, had 2 explosives. Easy passes early to get Baker's confidence going. Maybe some rollouts, maybe some bootlegs, lots of 12, some play action. That's how Cleveland's offense is going to be successful tonight, Todd.
We've seen the total take some under money. We've seen the side largely remain unchanged as we sit here and record Thursday morning. Anything that you've seen on your end in regards to either of those 2 major markets?
So when we look at the Thursday night game, it tends to favor the home team. That's better. When you look at that historically, the data is in the Browns' favor. However, I think when we look at this travel, obviously staying in the same state, not as large. Week 2 earlier in the season, that advantage isn't as large. But I think the Browns are in a good spot here. We did see it come off the 5.5. We're now at 6, even 6.5 at some sharper spots. And that is a pretty substantial number, right? It's not the value of 3 or 7, but since the extra point has moved back, 6 is one of the numbers that's increased in importance the most. So it is a decent sized move there. Not sure we see 7. You alluded to the total coming down, and it's a division game on a short week. So you're expecting vanilla game plans. We think that we know Kevin Stefanski is a run-first guy, so you get that ground game going. Burrow and that offense struggled a little bit, still not in the same timing with his receivers. So that's why that total's come down. Now, one thing I will say, I don't want to divulge too deeply into this, but over the years, at least the last handful of years, 44 and 43, were always some key total numbers. When you go back and look at the data last year, there really wasn't many key numbers. A lot of odd scores last year. 1.9% was actually the number landed on most last year. That was it. So not as much value based on last year lost, but 40, once you start getting around 44, 43, you still want to be cognizant of that number and get the best of it. And right now you're probably not on the good side of some of these numbers.
Should be an interesting game as two teams trying to figure out their identity. One, a franchise that intends to build around the number one overall pick in the draft, Joe Burrow, and another in the Cleveland Browns, trying to figure out exactly what they have if it is a franchise quarterback in Baker Mayfield, and how this team will look knowing all the money they spent to fortify their roster this past offseason. You can follow Payne on Twitter, as always, and you should be at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, you can follow the Bet the Board podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, we do have one final order of business to transact before we close up shop on this Thursday, but I think we should probably use this opportunity to make an announcement that a lot of people have asked about in terms of when we were going to return and address the college football gridiron in addition to just the NFL podcast.
You need me to do that?
If you'd like to do it, I can do it. You can do it. I mean, either way,
Guys,
we can share the
breaking information here. This is going to be a long-winded announcement. Buckle up, sit back, get ready. Here's the announcement. We're returning to college football podcast next Wednesday, the 23rd.
See, there you go.
There we go. That's it.
That's all we had to say. People have asked on social media. The audience deserves to know. We're not quite sure what the format's ultimately going to look like early on in the season without a whole lot of marquee matchups. But with the Big Ten announcing a return to play coming in late October, we're optimistic we're going to see the Pac-12 and maybe even the Mountain West. The great format that you guys have grown accustomed to should be back available for all of you on your favorite podcast providers. And next Wednesday with the kickoff of SEC conference play on Saturday, September 26th. So see,
Boom.
It was a whole lot of buildup, and all it took was a quick 3-foot putt, and all of a sudden, we're sitting pretty as we head into the clubhouse. But all right, before we shut things down today,
you golfed recently. How were your 3-foot putts?
I mean, you act like I can get within 3 feet of the pin. To have it one of those 3-foot putts and anything under than 7 strokes on a course that has nothing more, I should say, than par fours. My golf game leaves a lot to be desired. Let's just put it at that.
Yeah, but let's dive into that a little bit, just for a second.
Oh, here we go. Fire away.
I don't want you to lose our loyal listeners and have them think any less of you, but
they probably already don't think that highly of me to begin with it.
What's the strategy you employ hitting out of the sand?
I'd refuse to play out of the sand. I refuse to play out of the sand at this point in my golf career, and I use the term career loosely. This was the first round I played in 18 months over Labor Day weekend. One other thing about my golf game, Payne, because I can't control most of my clubs, I also don't swing a driver. So it gets to be obnoxious when I'm swinging a 7-iron from the tee box on a par 4 that's more than 400 yards. I'm known to piss off everybody in my group, but I'm perfectly fine with that, to be quite honest.
There you go. Golf tips from Todd.
Well, we'll figure it out. I mean, maybe in the spring I decide to make a commitment to it. I can't get as angry and frustrated and be the perfectionist that you are in everything you do. So I like to see it as a nice walk around in nature when it was 107 degrees. Thankfully, there was nobody on the course. And you're right. I don't play in sand. I don't want to rake. It takes me 37 strokes to get out of there. I'm much more comfortable putting through a windmill.
He doesn't want to rake the sand traps, folks.
Well, technically you can't now because there aren't even rakes out there. So I can do more damage to some of those sand traps than years worth of erosion can do. So I figure it's just safer for all parties involved.
I tried potentially getting back into the golf, then football season got here, but went out there. First 2 driving range sessions went extremely poor. Regripped all the clubs and haven't gotten back out there yet. Maybe find some time. Squeak out there, maybe Friday morning. We'll see. The
spring. We're going to make you make a commitment in the spring that you're going to have to play 18 holes a week. We're going to have you live blog it, and we're going to we're going to be able to chart all the scoring that you do because we know you'll get to play some of the highfalutin clubs down there in South Florida.
I don't know, man. I got to stick to the munis. We need short courses. I can't get off the tee box either.
All good. We completely digress, obviously. Let's just say that any of you loyal Bet the Board listeners out there who want to invite either of us out there on the links, you're going to be extremely disappointed with our ability or inability to actually play golf. I'm much better driving the cart. All right, to something that we actually can do well around these parts, and that's pick winners, Payne. When you look at the NFL board for week 2, where are you seeing the best investment opportunity?
Not as much as I liked Arizona last week, but let's go to rotation number 262. Let's go with the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll call it pick, but if you are savvy and you have enough outs as you should, you can get some 1.5. It's still out there, but we'll grade it at pick on the Philadelphia Eagles. I just think this is a tough spot. Sean McVay willed the Rams to a win last week. We're now going to ask him to do it again against a desperate Eagles team. And I think when we see the upgrades become official with Lane Johnson in, with Miles Sanders in, fingers crossed Javon Hargrave returns, fingers crossed Derek Barnett returns. But once those guys start to get announced in, we're going to see this screen move. I fully expect the Eagles to close a favorite on Sunday. So let's get out ahead of that. Grab the Eagles at a pick'em.
Always interesting, Payne. Our partners at FanDuel clearly know where we're going with our best bet, that they have one of the highest numbers out in the market with Philadelphia minus 1.5. But as we say all the time, shop around and get the best of the number. It will pay dividends in the long haul. The Philadelphia Eagles, a healthier batch, hopefully are able to get us to the window on Sunday. Any final words of wisdom, parting shots? I did want to say, again, special thanks to John Sheeran, who you should follow on Twitter as well, at JSheeran1981. He'll be with us every Thursday providing nuggets, much like he did today. I think it was an element we desperately lacked last season, and we know our listeners have come to appreciate that. But wanted to give you last word before we close up shop.
No, that's it. I concur. John was fantastic. Great to have that segment back in the fold for Bet the Board. I think it's a good one. And so that's it. Let's get out of Dodge. I got the bat line ringing here.
All right, go do what you got to do. Go do what you got to do, my friend. Philadelphia Eagles, your NFL Week 2 Bet the Board best bet. Come Sunday afternoon with a green ticket in hand. We'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.